I remember we obviously knew each other back when we were 14, 15. You always had an interest in cars.
I spent a lot of time working on trying to get into Coventry University, which was at the time at least the only place in the UK where you could study transport design, study vehicle design. It was a vehicle that we did for the Greek military. Now I came into that project relatively late. What do I mean by relatively late? The contract was signed. We're going to show the world something new, a different way of doing armoured vehicles.
And you did.
And we did. It's the Lamborghini Miura. The original supercar, the original mid-engine Lamborghini from the 1960s, the one before the Countach. It's often considered to be the most beautiful car of all time. It's certainly top 5 probably. The designer at the time was Lamborghini, working at the time for Plasan.
Welcome to another episode of Talk with the Scot. I am here, and I'm very happy that he's here. I'm here with a good old friend of mine, Nir Kahn. It's not the reason why he's on the podcast. He's got a very interesting story, so keep watching. But Nir, good to see you again.
Good to be here.
So we were talking off camera, and I said that quite often people say to me, especially my kids, for example, do you know anybody that's got their dream job, living their dream, like professionally speaking, living the life, and your name always comes to the, your name's always the first one there. Because I remember we obviously knew each other back when we were 14, 15. You always had an interest in cars. You always had an interest in design. You're a very creative person. And that has been your entire career. Cars, design, and you've done very well with it.
That's very flattering, first of all. So it's been a hard slog. If you'd have asked me when I was 9 or 10 years old what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have told you I wanted to be a Lego designer. I think we met just a little bit after that. A little bit after that. I would have told you I wanted to be a Lego designer. At the age of about 10, I realised that pretty much all I was building out of Lego was cars, and that Lego was kind of the medium that I was using, but that actually it was cars, because obviously I'd always been into cars as well. So honestly, from the age of 11, if you'd asked me, Neil, what do you want to be? What are you going to be when you grow up? I would have said a car designer, and basically spent my entire life working towards that. My entire life, my teenage years, I spent a lot of time working on trying to get into Coventry University, which was at the time at least the only place in the UK where you could study transport design, study vehicle design. So I put a lot of effort into getting onto that course. Gone in through the skin of my teeth, because I'm not naturally, so you say creative. I think I do have a natural bent towards creativity and towards design and certainly love for cars. Where I fell down was in the drawing. I'm not a natural artist. Okay. You can't put a bowl of fruit in front of me. Don't ever ask me to draw a portrait of you. Promise you that any of your kids can do a much better portrait than I can. Okay. I'm not a natural artist, so I had to work on that. I had to work on getting onto the course. The other thing that happened while I was going through Coventry, going through the course, was the realization that I also wanted to move back to Israel. I was born here, but I was only a baby when we left. I grew up in the UK, things you did. While I'm doing this course in transport design and following up what at the time, at the age of 20, was a lifelong ambition to be a car designer, I was also having to reconcile that with wanting to live in a country that doesn't have a car industry. The nearest car industry is, from here, is probably Italy, a couple of 1,000 kilometres away. So there was a lot of work that actually went into trying to reconcile those two ambitions, if you like.
But let's go back a bit, because you're talking about building cars from Lego, and where did that passion come from? Like anybody else in your family that has an interest in it?
Certainly some of it's hereditary. My dad's very into cars. All my early toys were cars, and the Matchbox Power Track set and the Matchbox cars, and my dad actually initially wanted to be an architect, so there was a certain element of that kind of designeriness in the family. I don't think when he grew up, I don't think the idea of being a car designer was even something that was on the register. He was never an architect either in the end, but that certainly, that part of me comes, there's a hereditary element to that. I was surrounded by cars as a kid. You look at all the pictures of me as a baby, and the wallpaper is racing cars and this kind of stuff. So I think part of it was slightly unavoidable. Yeah. But I had an affinity to that. It wasn't, I had very much a mechanical affinity. I was the kid that you pulled the toys apart to see how they worked.
Okay.
So there was that element as well. Again, the Lego. I think I still owe a good thank you to Lego.
To Lego?
Honestly, I honestly think I owe a good thank you to Lego. I think a lot of people in these kind of careers do.
That's funny. Because we obviously met maybe 14, 15, round about that age. And then a couple of years later, 17, we're both passed our driving test. And I always remember like just driving around with you in sort of country roads, and you were always talking to whoever was in the car about the horsepower of this and the chassis of that. And most people in the car, like, we have no idea what you're talking about. But you could see even back then, you know, just that pure passion and enthusiasm for what you were doing at that time. So much so, and you touched on Coventry, because I remember that. You had a big decision to make then. And the reason I'm bringing it up is obviously because lots of people will have a passion in something, lots of people will have an interest in something else. And at some point, you probably need to make some tough life decisions. And the decision that I'm referring to, and you know what I'm coming to, was you wanted to take a gap year in between finishing school, high school, and going to university. But in the end, you had to make the decision because I think Coventry would not defer your entry for a year. So you couldn't come, you wanted to come to Israel on a gap year program, you couldn't do that, and you had to go straight to uni. And I remember conversations with you around then. You know, it was a big decision. It wasn't obvious, but you thought Israel's always going to be there. I will end up there one day. I can't pass up this opportunity to follow my dream and my passion.
You're absolutely right, and the fact that you can remember that so clearly, it really emphasises quite how right you are. So yes, obviously passion is a big part of it. You know, I grew up reading Autocar magazine. That's where the horsepower specs were coming from. But yes, I got, as I said already, that I worked hard to get a place in Coventry. That I basically got in through the skin of my teeth. Yes, you're correct. I had to make a decision whether I was going to do this gap year in Israel or go straight to university, because the university basically said you've been accepted on the basis in the context of the other applicants this year. If you can take a year out, but you're going to have to reapply completely and within the context of next year's applicants. And there's no guarantee that, you know, compared to next year's applicants, that you're going to get on.
Yeah.
So yes, I had to make that decision. I think that there's a certain element here. I want to take some business lessons out of this of sunk cost. In that from the very, very beginning, I'd paid a price. I'd given something up to get onto this course, and that commitment, I think, helped me through the course itself. But also it helped me to remain focused. You know, I'd already given something up and paid a price in order to do this, so I wasn't going to give up on some smaller hurdle that came along later.
Well, that's actually what I was going to ask you, because obviously, you know, we're definitely going to talk about your career path and the challenges and all the rest of it. You probably, even when you're dealing with your own kids, you probably tap into that experience. Because at 17, that's a massive decision to take. Like, it really is when you think about it. How often do you put yourself back to that point and think, well, if I was mature enough then to deal with that sort of challenge or decision, what I'm now having to deal with, it's easy.
I think at the time, I'm not sure it was actually as hard a decision as we're putting it, because I think I was already so committed to being a car designer that I wasn't prepared to give up the chance. So it's every decision you make at the age of 17, 18 is actually a big life decision. And it's sometimes only when we look back and realise how many of those decisions we were making, bam, 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 one after the other, that all had a massive effect on the course of our lives and where we ended up. And I can think of plenty others in the years following that. Yeah. But yeah, maybe that was that initial first big step, as I say, that was a big commitment that perhaps made the other decisions that also involved sacrifice and hard decisions maybe almost a little bit easier. Again, I come back to there's a danger of looking at it kind of like a sunk cost. Like I've already paid a certain amount of price, so I better keep going. And I think that's actually quite a dangerous attitude as well. Sometimes success is absolutely about knowing when to give up on something, and when to make a change, when to make a pivot, when to take a different step, and not get sunk into that when I've already paid a certain price, I've already given something up, so I better keep going. I always think it's a very dangerous attitude. These people that say the winners don't quit kind of thing.
The winners know when it's...
The winners to a certain extent know when to quit,
Yeah.
but there's also the survival bias in that. In that you only look at the people who actually succeeded by not quitting, and you don't look at all the people who didn't.
Yeah.
They're much less visible,
Yeah.
and I've always been very conscious of that as well, I think.
Okay, so you finished Coventry, and you, if I remember correctly, you then came to Israel pretty much like straight away, actually.
I came straight to it. What I did was my first year in Israel. I was what's known as the Year Course Madrid. I was the youth leader for that year program that I'd wanted to come on as a participant.
Yeah.
So I never got to do it as a participant, but I did do it straight after university as the youth leader, and that gave me a year in Israel where I didn't need to worry too much, well, I didn't need to worry at all about where the food was coming from and whether there was going to be a roof over my head. Yeah. It was a completely different kind of business from what I wanted to be doing. What I was doing was not related directly to vehicle design. But I must say that youth movement experience did give me a lot that I still carry with me. Whether it's the ability to stand up in front of a conference and give a large talk. You knew me when I was a teenager. I was a much shyer, quieter guy back then.
Yeah, you were. You were far more creative. You were good at coming up with incredible ideas. But I remember the biggest challenge you had was in explaining the ideas.
Explaining ideas. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a common problem with creative people. Is that we have these ideas in our heads and it's very, very hard to get them across. Yeah. Again, in design, you're trying to get something across that's visual, and I had to overcome the fact that I wasn't very good at drawing. Yeah. That's the main way that you get your ideas across in design, is by drawing them, not by waving your hands around. Yeah. There are other elements of the work that I ended up doing, which we haven't really come on to yet, but I say which involve leadership, bringing people along with your vision. Yeah. I think that's probably the key element here. I think this is probably what you remember from the youth movement, is that I have this wild idea for an activity, and just that ability to draw people along with it and to have everybody else.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because I remember many times sitting and listening to you trying to explain the idea and what was obviously going through your mind, knowing it's a great idea, but just not understanding how it all connects, to each bit connecting to the next bit. But you always were able to draw the room because of your creativity. And some people don't have the level of creativity, and some people don't have the ability to stand up and explain it.
I think there is a certain innateness to some of that. There are learned skills and there are innate skills. I can tell you, I said that I got through into Coventry through the skin of my teeth. I remember very, very clearly what I was told during the interview process. The way that it worked then was that groups of students were brought in, they leave their portfolios in the room. The tutors look through the portfolios of work, literally send 50%, 2/3 of the people home without even exchanging a word with them. I was one of the lucky ones that got called into the room. And the first thing they said to me was, I don't want you to get your hopes up. Normally, under normal circumstances, would have just told you to go home. But your portfolio was so bad, we figured that you need some help. And we wanted to give you a little bit of advice, about how to put a portfolio together. It's clear you didn't have the same kind of art training that the others did. One of the things they told me, the first thing they told me, we opened up the portfolio, and the very first drawings in there were drawings I'd done when I was 14 years old. And the first thing the tutor said to me was, take those out. For God's sake, take those out. The very first thing I'm looking at is these childish scribbles. And I said, no, I left those in for a reason. I said, because that's where I was 14 years ago, and this is where I am now, flicking to the back end of the portfolio. And I want you to see, this is what I've managed to do on my own in 4 years, and I want you to now imagine what I'm going to be able to do in the next 4 years with your help, from this starting point. And that was the moment that the conversation changed a little bit. It was literally the moment that they went from just explaining to me politely why I hadn't been accepted to actually listening a little bit. And the one tutor, the final thing that he said, I remember, was, I can teach a monkey to draw. That's literally what he said to me. He says, I can teach a monkey to draw. You're right, give me 4 years, I can teach a monkey to draw. I can't teach him to design. If he doesn't have that innate ability, that innate creativity, that innate vision, then being able to draw is only going to help them to illustrate bad ideas.
Yeah.
I think that you've got the potential here, and all you really need is the help to get these ideas out, to communicate these ideas to other people, and go, okay, maybe we can help you.
Wow, that's impressive. That is. It's one of those conversations that literally changes your life.
Yeah, I remember it very clearly, and it was 33 years ago.
Yeah, we're getting old.
Yeah, we're getting
old.
old.
It is, indeed. Some of the posts that I'm putting out on the website, I'm also tapping into experiences that I've had over the years, and a couple of them I've made reference to just conversations I've had with a manager that I've had from years back, or a colleague, or whatever it is, because there's just certain things, whether you're 5 years into your professional career or 25 years, certain things just stick out in the memory that have a massive impact on the direction that you go. And so you're now a 17, 18-year-old kid at that point. You've made that huge decision, you've just had that conversation, and you know the path that you're going down. You then come to Israel, first year's taken care of. I think you had one or two maybe small jobs when you first came to Israel after that year of leading the group. But then you ended up starting, if I'm right, at Plasan.
At Plasan, yes. We maybe shouldn't skip over those like 1.5, 2 years in between, because that was another moment, perhaps deal with the possibility that I wasn't going to make it. I wasn't going to do what I wanted to do.
Okay.
I did a little bit of freelance work on electric shopping cart, effectively, electric a Kalnuit, as they're known here.
Okay.
There's 3-wheel electric vehicles. So I did a little bit of freelance work, but very quickly, kind of the very little, the no money that I had ran out, and I took a high-tech job for about a year and a half. It was very emotionally, I think it was very difficult for me to be sitting in front of a computer doing a high-tech job, having made these sacrifices, having had this dream, and then coming out. I knew it wasn't going to be easy.
Yeah.
It was very difficult for me to feel that I wasn't necessarily fulfilling what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I got lucky. Yes, success has a lot to do with being in the right place at the right time. I always say that the secret to that is to find the right place and to wait, because trying to get them both to line up by chance is
not
tricky.
easy.
It's not easy. But yes, long story short is that I found this company, Plasan, who at the time, back in 2001, put some context on this here, way back in 2001, they are a small company on a kibbutz, up on Kibbutz Sasa, in the north of Israel, doing armour. They were Plasan Sasa composite materials, using composite materials to make armour. Initially body armour for vests, they just started getting into putting armour on vehicles. They were literally rolling in Jeeps, Hummers, that kind of thing, and putting their composite armour onto these vehicles.
Yeah.
And I got brought in because they wanted the local market had basically been saturated, and they were looking for export market, and realised that they needed to kind of up the game a little bit in terms of the type of product they were putting out. And I got brought in as a young vehicle designer with a weird skill set as far as they were concerned. Talk about lucky timing. Lucky is probably the wrong way to phrase this. But my first day at Plasan was the 2nd of September 2001. So a lot of things came together at the same time. Within a week and a half, the whole world changed. It was September 11th, 2001. So this little kibbutz company that was making armour mostly for the local market and trying to get into the overseas market. That overseas market suddenly changed. Not entirely overnight, but that was certainly...
It was a gradual process.
There was a gradual process, but it certainly started literally the week that I started there. And we started doing some cool stuff together. The first international project, actually not remotely related to September the 11th or anything like that, was a vehicle that we did for the Greek military. Now, I came into that project relatively late. What do I mean by relatively late? The contract was signed, and I got brought into a meeting in the management office. And in that meeting, there were marketing guys, and there were engineers, and there was the CEO of the company, and everybody was there. And what they needed from me was to do some drawings of what this Greek Humvee was going to look like, because basically what had been sold to them wasn't actually answering the requirements.
Okay.
And it was basic stuff. It was, they wanted to put it needed storage in the back, so the back needed some kind of hatchback like that. And I was just asked to do some drawings about what their vehicle is going to look like. And I saw the opportunity. So I didn't just draw a box with a hatchback. I drew what I thought was quite a cool looking vehicle. Threw these drawings down on the table in the meeting room. And there was a sharp intake of breath as everybody looked at these drawings. And the very first thing that I was told was, Nir, you realise it can't look like this, right? And I quite naively, 27 years old, just said, well, why not? And quite honestly, why not? I didn't think that I was doing anything particularly courageous. Why not? And they said, because the customer doesn't care what it looks like. So I think anybody else might have tried to argue that point and explain, the designer in me kind of wanted to explain why, even though the customer doesn't think he cares what it looks like, that it matters, and etc., etc., etc. But that's not what I did. They said the customer doesn't care what it looks like, and I said, great. So why can't it look like that? And then the engineers started throwing various reasons out. Oh, because you put a bend in the side and our material can't be bent. And I was like, okay, so we'll make it out of 2 parts. Oh, if we make it out of 2 parts, there'll be a gap there where the bullets can come through. It needs to be bulletproof. And then, so we'll put an overlapping piece underneath. They started throwing all these reasons out why it couldn't look like that. And this went round the table quite a few times of me pretty much answering why not to most of their questions. And at some point, and again, it wasn't even just the engineers that were against these drawings that I'd thrown down. The marketing people were as well. As far as they're concerned, they had an order in hand. They had a $10 million contract, which is the biggest contract that Kibbutz had ever had. And I often say it was as if I was asking to make a paper aeroplane out of a check rather than just do the vehicle. So in one of these rounds, there was a flustered, I don't remember who it was, but there was a very flustered, and it just can't be like that. And finally, the CEO of the company, who'd been very, very quiet up until now, said, why not? And the whole atmosphere of the conversation changed. Again, to cut a long story short, I was then tasked with finding out what all these issues were that were being thrown out, all the practical issues, all the things that needed to do, manufacturing constraints, material constraints, all this kind of stuff. And I sort of come back in 1 week and with answers to all of these questions. And then we'll take a decision
which way we go.
Yeah. Whether we go the safe, conservative route or if we take a risk. So I went off and spent a week doing very manual drawings, but literally sections of how things can be put together and showing how the materials are going to be put together and where we're going to put bolts and how it's all going to work and showing that it can still look like what I thought was the cool drawing that I'd done.
Yeah.
And we had another round. And at the end of that, the CEO slammed his hand down on the table and he said, actually, there was a moment before that. This was the scary moment. He looked me in the eye and he said, there's only one question left here. Do you really believe that we can do this? Because there's a deadline, in 9 months' time we need a prototype. The customer's already paid for it. I think that if we can do this, it's going to change everything, but we can't mess around it. Yeah. And he looked us right in the eye and was like, do you honestly believe we can do this? And until somebody actually, I was still young and I'd never done anything like this before, genuinely. Until somebody looks you in the eye and asks you that question, it was really daunting. I suddenly realised what I was proposing. I was no longer a student, trying to get a grade by throwing some nice drawings on the table. Yeah. This was a company betting their future on what I thought we could do. So I took a deep breath and I said, I don't think there's any outstanding problems here that we can't solve. I think is how I put it. Words to that effect. I don't think there's anything left that we can't solve. Danny slammed his hand down on the table and was like, let's do this. I think we're going to really make a difference. We're going to show the world something new, a different way of doing armoured vehicles.
And you did.
And we did.
Very much so.
Yes.
Again, it really, as somebody who's obviously, I have no interest in cars, and me and you have had this conversation many times. I have no interest in cars. As long as it gets me from A to B, I'm quite happy with it. However, before I buy any car, I will always phone you or send you a message with a picture and say, what do you think of this? And you'll tell, right? So you, at that point, the design and the direction that you and the executive team of Plasan went in, you really did change the market. like completely. And I remember speaking to you at that point, around about that time, in terms of all those designs and ideas, and you really did change an industry.
We did, and I don't think that I realised at the time quite how much. We showed that, as I say, it was still a Hummer. Underneath was a Humvee chassis, but it had an upper body that had been designed.
Yeah.
Nobody had ever really designed an armoured vehicle before. They were just welded steel boxes, and this one had a bit of style to it. It had a look about it, and it grabbed attention. When we first showed it, military show in Paris, it got an awful lot of attention, and everybody was coming up to us. We were still I say we are not with Plasan anymore, but at the time we were still a tiny little company that most people had never heard of.
Yeah.
And there was this, relatively speaking, spaceship. It's funny, when you look at it now, it doesn't look as far out as it did at the time because of everything that came afterwards.
Yeah.
At the time, it was like a spaceship had landed on the stand. It's like, what is this? Who did this? And we were very proudly standing next to it saying, we did. They said, okay, we understand Plasan Sasa composite materials. Okay, so the materials are yours, but who designed it? We did. And all of a sudden, other companies were coming up to us and saying, "Oh, can you do this for us? Can you do this on our chassis?" It sent out a very strong message. When I was first told the customer doesn't care what it looks like, and I rather facetiously just said, "Great." The truth is that the customer does care what it looks like, and this is the speech I'm giving now. And here we could really see this when it was there on the stand, because it sent out a very strong message that we weren't just a company that added armour to vehicles, that we understood vehicles.
Yeah.
We understood door seals, and we understood door handling, we understood how vehicles operate, each component. And if you can feel in the door that somebody's put an effort into designing the door in a way that it's easy to open and easy to close and there's great field of vision, then you don't worry about the stuff that you don't see.
Yeah.
All design is all about this. It's about sending out a strong message that your product is a well thought out product. It's not an improvised product. It's not something that's just been made up as it goes along. Thought went into it from the very beginning, and there was execution, and there was clearly good cooperation between all elements, because otherwise you can't create something like that. So it's all about that message. And yes, it's that particular vehicle sent out a very strong message that really changed the course of Plasan.
But it's interesting because people that are watching this and listening to you, obviously most people won't know anything about you apart from what you're sharing. I obviously do know you, but there's a common theme that throughout everything that you're saying, whether it's starting at the age of 17 and making that big decision, and then making another decision 3 or 4 years later to come to Israel, and then making a decision a year or a year and a half after working that tech job that it's not for you. You've been very, very, and even in that meeting with the CEO, Nir Kahn, you maybe responded that you gave yourself a little bit of an out, but ultimately the decision making from the age of 17, maybe before, but 17 all the way up for the next 10 years, it's been made with a real mature level of confidence, passion, dedication, and that's something that you don't see in a lot of people.
I'm not sure that the maturity and confidence necessarily goes together. There's a certain argument it could be the other way around. I'm still very proud of that Greek company. I'm proud of what we managed to achieve. I'm proud of how it looks. If I was doing that same project now, it would be completely different.
Yeah. Completely
different because of everything I've learned since then. You can get away with a lot of stuff when you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
In car design generally, there's been a lot of good examples of this. The one car that's often held up as being the most beautiful car of all time is the Lamborghini Miura. The original supercar, the original mid-engine Lamborghini from the 1960s, the one before the Countach. It's often considered to be the most beautiful car of all time. It's certainly top 5, top 10. The designer at the time was Gandini, working at the time for Bertoni. He was, if I'm not mistaken, 22 years old when he did that.
Okay.
And there's a big element there. I don't want to try and make any kind of comparison between myself and the great Marcello Gandini, but of somebody very, very young, not really knowing what they can't do. There are certain things you can achieve that you can only achieve when you don't have those breaks and doubt holding you back. Is the confidence a sign of maturity, or is the confidence a sign of immaturity? A sign of for me, certainly, I think it was just a sign of having a feeling that I had no choice.
Yeah.
This was my opportunity to make a mark. This was my opportunity to do something. And I was, having made these sacrifices along the way, I was not prepared to let that go.
Right, and that's an important point because you say making your mark. I remember at that point when that design came out and then it went to production. I mean, it was all over the place. Yeah, and I remember you sending to lots of friends cuttings and bits from newspapers and magazines, and you were all over the place. You made your mark at that point that pushed you, and opened many doors for you further down the road that you're still benefiting from today, and we'll get onto that in a second. But again, it's a sign of confidence in your ability, confidence, naivety, call it whatever you want. But ultimately, you rolled the dice. You really did roll the dice. You might have been wrong when you answering the CEO with your, I believe we've dealt with it. Well, 2 weeks later, you might have come across a problem and you didn't have a solution for it. You rolled the dice. And I think that's a big difference between somebody like yourself that has that passion and drive in one particular area, as opposed to somebody that's working in a job for the sake of working in a job for the money.
Yeah, certainly the passion is a big part of that. I don't just do jobs for the money. A lot of that confidence came from having a good team around, of course. It wasn't me that did most of the really hard work.
Yeah.
So when I was being asked, do you believe we can do this? It wasn't, do you believe you can do this? It's, do you believe we can do this? Having coming to Plasan, I've been in Plasan maybe a year and a half by then. Knowing the team, knowing the capabilities they have, do you believe we can do this? And so yes, it wasn't just unfounded self-confidence. It was confidence in the team around me, that we could achieve this, that we could do this, that we could see this vision through. There was certainly a moment when I first saw a photo of a field of these, a car park full of these things in Greece, like 200 of these vehicles, just my drawing replicated 200 times in the car park. And this is something that I felt at the time and has recurred a few times since, is that moment where I just look at it and I just said to myself, I was only joking. I can't believe we've actually done this. That moment of realisation, I think that we took a hell of a risk, and we just looked at this drawing and decided we were going to make it, and all of a sudden there's 200 of them sitting in a field ready to get fielded. I never quite get used to that.
But is that doubting your own ability? Is that your imposter syndrome coming out? Is that...
There's a certain amount of imposter syndrome, and we can talk about that. The impossibility, not believing that it's actually me that's doing
your team.
Yeah. There's been plenty times where it doesn't always just flow out. Creativity is not there's a Calvin and Hobbes routine, Calvin and Hobbes sketch. Creativity is not a faucet, it's not a tap, it's not something you can just switch on.
Yeah.
The end of that, and it was on my wall for years and years. You have to be in the right mood.
Yeah.
What mood is that? Last minute panic. That's the mood you have to be in. So there were plenty times when I'd spend maybe weeks and it's just not coming, it's just not there. And then all of a sudden, often fairly late in the afternoon or evening, there's just something flowing. The tap just opens, and it's there, and it's coming together. And
it's funny you say that, actually. Sorry to interrupt, because I remember watching an interview with Noel Gallagher from Oasis, and he says something very similar. He says, my best approach to being creative is to try not to be creative. Like, I'll just switch off, I'll do something else, I won't even think about music, and then at some point something will just come to me, and then I get back in and I start working on it.
Very much about being in the right frame of mind at the right time and having that spark. And it's the same with all creative industries. I look a lot at how movie directors and musicians. I watch a lot of these kind of documentaries, that really long Beatles one on the Disney Channel, which is just incredible to see this, how they created Let It Be. So what I was about to say, I'll do this, do some drawings, and I'm like, okay, I think I've got it this time. And then comes the doubt. Is this just because I'm absolutely desperate now? I'm just like, there's no more time left, and whatever is on the desk right now, I'm just going to have to go with it. And that's the point normally where I'll put the pens down. I won't send it to anybody. I won't share it with anybody. I'm like, I think I'm pleased with it. Put the pen down, go home. Come back the next morning, walk in, and I'll look at these drawings on the table. And it's happened a good few times where I'm looking at them and I'm just thinking, who did that? I don't recall doing that. I think that's like, and it's that moment where I kind of sometimes you'll fall in love with my own design. Like, I like that a lot. That's great. That's great. Who did that? Like, I want to meet the person who did that.
That's surely a great feeling.
It is, but it's also that doubt. You talked about imposter syndrome. That doubt is part of that. Plasan went on after that Greek company to do all kinds of things, mostly for the US, for the British. It was pretty much all export, and we did some incredible things around the world. And I remember at one point, maybe 10 years into my career in Plasan, I was there a long time, and maybe 10 years into my career in Plasan, a little bit less, and they brought in a branding team, a marketing team, to rebrand the company, because we'd gone very, very quickly from being this tiny little kibbutz company to being something on the international stage, and the branding all needed to get brought up to that level. I remember being interviewed by the guy about the company and this kind of thing, and saying to him that I often had that, I had that feeling where we're working with some of the big names in the industry. We're working with Lockheed Martin in the United States, and feeling that we're playing with big boys, and a very uncomfortable feeling that any minute now we're going to get found out. I remember having this conversation with him. This is the feeling that I have at the moment, that any minute now we're going to get found out.
So how did you overcome that?
Because he looked with a very quizzical look on his face, and this was not a kind of a coaching conversation. He's talking about, you are the big boys. You are the big boys, and you need to understand that, and you need to come to terms with that, and you need to start playing at that level and with that attitude. You're not, kids that have been invited to the grown-ups football match anymore. You are elite. You're playing with the big boys now.
So it's interesting, because I want to try and touch on that and understand how you reconcile with that and overcame it, because I'm the exact same. Time to time, imposter syndrome, all the rest of it. But I remember maybe 10 years ago, I started doing some work with the likes of Sony and Intel, American Express. And I remember thinking, well, at one point, this is not like a little dental surgery that I'm dealing with now. These are serious players in their respective, not just their respective industry, worldwide. Like, got to step up. You've got to, your vocabulary needs to change. You've got to become more professional. How you dress when you're meeting with them, like the whole approach. And even then, you still have the self-doubts. So how did you, apart from this marketing guy saying you are the big guys, how did you overcome that?
I'm not sure you ever entirely overcome it, I have to be honest. The other thing is, imposter syndrome, whatever that actually means, I think it's only something that really affects people who, on one level or another, have made it. I think the fact that you suffer from imposter syndrome, that you're concerned that you're going to get found out, that you're playing with the big boys, and that you don't deserve to be there. It's something. It's almost a luxury that only people who've reached that point. Maybe luxury is the wrong word, but it's only people who've reached that point that get to deal with that and get to grapple with that.
You think you're going to be found out?
Yes, and from many conversations with many professional people, it's one of the things that nobody likes to talk about.
Yeah.
Because who would want to admit it?
Yeah.
Who would want to sit on a podcast with a 25-year career behind them and admit that you still sometimes feel like you're not quite good enough and you don't deserve to be where you are? Who on earth would admit that? And plenty of people have these feelings.
Absolutely.
They just don't talk about it.
Why would you? But you know what? I think it actually takes a really confident person to stand up and say, I've got 25 years experience in this field. I've done this and I've done that and I've done, a bunch of stuff. I've changed an industry at one point. I'm still not sure if I'm good enough. And that takes a huge amount of confidence.
We're all still teenagers inside.
Yeah.
Really. I think we're all still going through that same path of wanting to prove yourself. And of course, there's always somebody who's better. That's the thing. The imposter syndrome basically comes from knowing that you're not the very, very best.
Yeah.
Very, very, very few people can honestly stand up and say that they are the very, very best and believe that they're very, very best. For as long as you're not quite there, there's always that nagging doubt. There's always somebody doing something better and greater. And I think it does. It takes a certain maturity to appreciate other people's work, to to recognise it, to appreciate it, to not see it as a threat.
Yeah.
We're all doing different things. We're all taking different paths. I'm proud of the path that I've taken. I think all of us at some point have that kind of imaginary conversation with our 10-year-old self. Right? What would Nir age 10 think about Nir age 50? Would he?
What would he?
Well, I think he'd be disappointed that I haven't actually designed a Ferrari. But does that?
I'm sure the Nir 50 is disappointed.
Exactly. Does that mean that I should be disappointed with what I'm doing? I think he'd be pretty pleased with what I've managed to do with the tools that were available. So I chose quite a difficult path.
Yeah.
To be a vehicle designer in a country that doesn't make vehicles.
Yeah.
When I look at my life now and things that I'm doing now, I'm pretty pleased with some of the things that I'm able to do.
And we're definitely going to touch on that. But you brought up the team, and I have a fantastic team where I work. We're a team of 5-6 people, and I'm very, very, as you know, I'm a big football fan, so I'm very, very big on team before individual. You're only as good as your team.
Yeah.
And we succeed as a team, we fail as a team, and all the rest of it. Talk about the team that you had, and more equally as important, how you managed them, how you worked with them. Were you very on top of everything? Are you very detailed orientated, or are you trusting that they know what they're doing, they're getting on with it?
First of all, the team in Plasan grew very rapidly and very organically. So when I came on in September 2001 into what was then the prototyping team, there were 10 of us. And each
the whole company?
No, there were 10 in the prototyping
okay.
team. The whole company was only about 80.
Right.
And it became over 1,000. But at the time, we were that prototyping team. There were 10 of us, and each of us had a pretty clear job. There was the welding guy, and there was the electrical guy, and each person, the kind of mechanisms technologist, and each person had a particular job. And I was the vehicle designer. I think it took an awful lot of vision for Plasan at the time to realise that was a function that needed to be on the team. I was on there as the vehicle designer, and each of those kind of 10 functions grew pretty organically to become kind of sub-departments,
okay.
to become teams, and then department. At peak, at one point, I had about 12 people working under me in my team, and it was 4 vehicle designers. I don't think anybody in Israel has ever hired 4 vehicle designers. There were 4 vehicle designers. There were a couple of industrial designers who were mostly doing interior work and plastics and this kind of thing. And I had kind of my own mini workshop, basically doing backformings, textiles and this kind of stuff. And there was a team of 12 that were working under me. There's always a danger with that kind of organic growth of, I was suddenly a manager.
Yeah.
And I think I have natural leadership skills. They don't necessarily translate directly to what an actual manager is.
Yeah.
And I very much took that on as being a creative lead, rather than trying to or pretending to be a manager in the traditional sense.
Okay.
So yes, it was always very hard to relinquish certain control. That's something I think we all struggle with. I certainly struggle with. When you've got a very clear vision about what it is that you want, and you've got other people that are doing it for you. What I tended to try to do was to wrap up sub-projects that I could hand over and say, okay, this is yours. This is yours in that bubble. Having said that, I think the best work that we did was when we did divide the work up between us on an individual project. And again, where it was clear what each person's role and responsibility was. I'm not a micromanager by any stretch of the imagination, but no, if I've got a vision about what it is that I want, then yeah, I could probably be a little bit, certainly at the time, I think I've learned since then, a bit harder than maybe I would have liked to have been, when I didn't get what I wanted.
And did you become aware of that through self-reflection or feedback from your team?
Both. So
you were open to that. You were receptive to that feedback.
Yes, both. I was aware when I was being a little bit too critical, perhaps.
Okay, fair enough. So it's funny because you obviously ultimately you were the lead, the head of design, and you had a lot of people under you, and as you say, it went from 80 to 1,000. So again, you go back to that 26-year-old, 27-year-old that turned to the CEO and the naivety, confidently, whatever it is. You said, yeah, we can make this work. In part, you've had a huge impact on a company growing from 80 to 1,000 people. Not saying just you. All those jobs that you've helped create. I mean, that in itself must give you huge amount of positivity, of self-worth.
I don't take too much of that credit. There was a lot of people and a big company and a lot of luck and a lot of being in the right place at the right time, just all kinds of things that came together. We rode on the backs of giants to a certain extent, where we were basically designed vehicles for companies like Oshkosh Trucks and Navistar, who went on, who the vehicle that we created together with them, and it was a team effort, again, not just within our little team. Most of the teamwork that I'm talking about is actually between our team and the companies that we're working with, usually on the other side of a big ocean.
Yeah.
And there's a whole subject there about remote working and working using long distance communication tools and this kind of stuff. But yeah, we rode on the backs of giants to a certain extent. We helped design a vehicle that was being produced at a rate of 1,000 vehicles a month, which was just unheard of in military vehicle terms. The things that made me feel good wasn't the big stuff, and to a certain extent, it was the lives that were being saved. We were designing armoured vehicles, and we were designing armoured vehicles during a period when it was really important.
Yeah.
Iraq, Afghanistan, we were providing vehicles for the American military, for the US, for the Australians, for the Europeans, all kinds. And knowing that the vehicles that we designed were saving lives was a big heart warmer, genuine feeling of mission when you go into work, a feeling of mission. But of all of that, the thing that warmed me, that touched me more than anything else, is when Matchbox brought out a model of one of the vehicles that I designed. And even now I'm feeling emotional saying it.
That's very cool.
Because I was the kid that had grown up playing with little Matchbox cars.
Yeah.
And building stuff out of Lego. Lego will never make anything military, and a lot of what I was doing was military, so I kind of resigned myself to the fact that there would never be a Lego kit of anything that I've designed, although there are some knockoff ones. But it was the Matchbox car. And there were actually two of them. There was a Matchbox model of the Navistar, best part of 10 years ago now. Actually a little bit more. 2012, I think. There was a Matchbox model of the Oshkosh MATV and a Matchbox model of the Navistar MXT. And the fact that there was an actual Matchbox, branded Matchbox, real Matchbox model that you could buy in Asda for £1.50 or in Walmart for a couple of dollars kind of thing, that was just incredible that you talk about a feeling of recognition and of having arrived.
Yeah.
That was the moment, but only because, or especially because, it was just so unlikely. So unlikely. My friends from Coventry, I mean, you need to understand what that transport design course in Coventry is like. I've got some friends in some pretty decent places. A very good friend of mine is the design director at Aston Martin. And yes, he's got Matchbox cars, I think he's designed as well, but he works at Aston Martin.
Yeah.
I'd taken this bizarre, unlikely path through Israel, through a tiny little kibbutz company up in Kibbutz Sasa, and there I was, standing in the airport on the way out to on a business trip, and at Ben Gurion here at Toys R Us, there's a whole rack full of a car that I've designed, and I took them all.
That's amazing.
I cleaned the shelves off just to hand them out to my nieces and stuff when I got up to London.
That's amazing.
That's the moment. Passion is not necessarily the prize is not even necessarily being part of a big company and all the money that comes in and all this kind of stuff. It's not that kind of success. The payoff of the passion is knowing that there are kids slamming my car into skirting boards all over the world.
Well, that's very cool. Usually when I'm preparing for like recording another episode. I obviously have to do some research into the person and their history and their background. Didn't have to do that so much with you, obviously, because we've known each other a long time. However, when I think of where you were working, it always takes me to that famous scene in A Few Good Men, you know, in the court case when Jack Nicholson talks about, I eat breakfast like 100 metres or far, go a kilometre away from people that are trying to kill me. I'm not trying to get all, exaggerating and everything, but you were driving from your house to the office most days. You were managing a big team in a company, and literally half a kilometre away or so, approximate, Hezbollah were sitting. And we know that they were watching you because the offices got bombed or hit by a rocket intentionally about 6 months ago, maybe even a bit more. Having that in the back of your mind, or maybe at the forefront of your mind every day, that something could happen, does that change your approach to dealing with people? Does it change your approach when you're at work? It just, because that's obviously not your everyday managerial gig. When you know that people are watching you and the potential for something to kick off at any moment.
Yeah, it's 3 kilometres, not half a kilometre.
So it's all right.
Yeah, I was at Plasan for 22 years, so I was at Plasan during 2006 as well, when the Second Lebanon War kicked off. The whole story I can tell around that, which I'm not going to tell now. But I know what you're saying. Certainly, my last 6 months at Plasan, which were basically the 6 months following October 7th, when the northern border was hot and we were going in to work. And the issues there are in managing a team, certainly my design team, which by then was a much smaller team. I went ups and downs, but there were 3 of us by the end. The design team doesn't have to go in as much as some other people do.
Okay.
In terms of the ability to work, we used to working remotely anyway. We work remotely with customers all over the world. For me as the manager, it was important to kind of lead by example. Under no circumstances at all was I going to try and talk people into coming in that didn't want to come in. But I certainly knew that I couldn't expect anybody to come in if I wasn't doing it myself.
Yeah.
So I went in every day. The other reason I went in was actually less because of the handful of people who were under my kind of direct responsibility, but more actually for all of the other people who didn't have a choice.
Okay.
Because it's all teamwork.
Yeah.
But teamwork isn't just the 3 designers. We're working with everybody else in the company. The other engineers who largely could also, to a certain extent, work from home. But there are a lot of people who can't work from home.
Yeah.
We're building prototypes. There's a lab there. There is a workshop there. There's stuff being physically made. The whole factory's there. All of those people had no choice really but to go into work. So I made a point not just of going in, but of making sure that I walked around. I really made a deliberate effort to make sure that all those people that had no choice could see that the people who did have a choice were still going in. We're all in it together. We're not expecting anybody else to do something that we're not prepared to do ourselves.
Yeah.
Because that was all. It's all part of team building and trust building, and you can't expect somebody to 3 years later to work a late night because you want something when all you can remember is where the hell were you when the rockets were coming?
Yeah.
So I certainly saw a lot of personal responsibility to lead by example and to make the effort to go in, even though I could probably have worked from home.
I know that you're now freelance. If anybody's looking for a design, reach out to Nir. I'll put his contact details on the screen. You're 50. Or rather, we're 50.
Shh, they're watching.
Where's the next 10, 15 years? You're obviously doing a lot of freelance work just now.
Yeah.
Well, what's the plan?
So I've really made quite a change in the last year and a half. So I left Plasan nearly a year and a half ago now, February last year, 2024. And since then I've been doing a few things. I'm available as a freelance vehicle designer, and I'm working on that and as a consultant in those kind of areas. Still some military vehicle design work, but a lot of civilian vehicle design work. The main thing which I'm doing actually is a company that I've established together with some other ex-Plasan people, a company called DB Composites, Dynamic Blue Composites, working on civilian applications for composite materials. This was work that we were doing in Plasan for 10, 15 years as well. We've talked a lot about the military stuff, because the most visible of certainly my design work has been the military vehicles that started off on my table. But at least half of the work that I was doing in Plasan for the last 10 years has actually not been military at all. It was working on civilian applications, I say civilian applications, mainstream vehicle applications for composite materials to take weight out of vehicles. Because everything we did in Plasan was really about designing weight out of vehicles. This is not the forum to go into the technicalities of it, but it's all about designing weight out of vehicles. And I was very keen, because of my own passions, from my first day in Plasan, of this technology that we have and the things we're doing with it. There are applications beyond armour. And so we were doing a lot of work in the civilian field, working with mainstream vehicle manufacturers. The truth is that Plasan's heart, Plasan's DNA, was never entirely there. It was always seen as a bit of a side project. And there were quite a few of us within Plasan that were very involved in this, but it was very much seen as a side project. The short version of the story is that the CEO, who I talked about at the very beginning, who was very supportive of the design work, he retired a couple of years ago. And under new management, Plasan wanted to refocus on the military, on the defence side of the business, and had even less attention to the civilian side of the business. And myself and a few others who very much believe, talk again, coming back to that confidence, just having a genuine belief that we have something to offer. Basically, we've taken it out of Plasan. So we've established DB Composites with, again, another few people that have come through Plasan, come out of Plasan. There are agreements in place with Plasan in terms of IP and patents, and that everything that's related to the civilian market now belongs to us. But it's not a Plasan company. It's not technically a Plasan daughter company or a Plasan spin-off. It isn't a Plasan daughter company or a Plasan spin-off or anything like that. It's a new startup company that's effectively continuing the work that we did within Plasan. So it's a startup that's hit the ground running, and that's been the main focus of what I've been doing certainly for the last 12 months.
What are the differences that you found between being like a founder in the startup at the very beginning, as opposed to going into an already established company, maybe small in the grand scheme of things? What are you finding as the challenges?
It's difficult to say because I'm at a different place in my life now. The question was, you're 50 now, what's different? So that's the main thing that's different. When I joined Plasan at the age of 26, I was a young guy with no illusions that I was in any way a founder or running the place, and the company had already existed for the best part of 20 years. With hindsight, most of the development of Plasan occurred from that moment and onwards, and I was very much part of the building of and developing of what Plasan became. But no, I wasn't a founder by any stretch of the imagination. I wasn't considered, I wasn't seen as that within the company. I was the young guy. Whereas now it's very different. Now this is, I'm very much part of the founding team that is founding this. I am very much aware again of where my strengths are and where they aren't. We talked before about, I'm not really a natural manager, and that's not the right place for me to be. There's often, certainly in creative and technical fields, there's often a problem where very good experts get promoted to their level of incompetence, as the only way is up, and eventually become the person who's managing other experts, and that's not necessarily where they ought to be. So that's not where I am now. My role is as head of design for DB Composites, is in focusing that vision, is in working together with all the other people who are putting the meat on the bones. It's very much part of the, I'm very much frontal in terms of communication with the vehicle manufacturers that we're talking to, because I speak their language. It's a common language. I just came back from a week in the UK, seeing various people, none of whom I'm going to name. When you sit in that studio or in that engineering room, and people, you see lingo. People very, very quickly can realise who's BSing and who actually knows what they're talking about. And I think one of the, it's often a problem when marketing people go off and do the marketing and don't realise when they ought to bring an actual subject matter expert with them, because they can talk the talk and they think they're doing a great job being next to people like that in the past where I've just been begging them to, under my breath, just to shut up. Because I can see that across the room is somebody who really knows what they're talking about, and they can see right through them.
Yeah.
And so a large part of what I'm doing now is making sure that the people in the room are the people who know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And then you can have that conversation, and it's an open, friendly conversation. We were doing this in Plasan, we're doing this now. Again, talk about the maturity of confidence. It's one thing, a 27-year-old standing in a kibbutz meeting room and saying, I think that we can do this. It's no easier being a 50-year-old and sitting across from the VP engineering of a large vehicle manufacturer and trying to convince them that we have capabilities that they don't have. Yep. That we can work together and we can do something together that they can't do on their own. Again, there's a certain confidence in that, and again, it comes back down to knowing your stuff and to be able to talk the talk. You can't BS.
No, you can't. Certainly not in an industry like that. And it's funny because it reminds me. You'll laugh at this. When I was living in London, so I was doing reasonably well. So I decided that I'm going to buy a new car. So I went, and it so happened my dad was down from Glasgow in London for that weekend or a few days. So he came car shopping with me, and I was maybe like 24, 25. So I want a convertible. I want a sports car convertible. So off we went. We're looking, and I looked at the MGTF, which you probably know. Yeah. Beautiful car. I didn't know it had a mid-engine. I didn't know what a mid-engine was. So anyway, the guy's talking.
You should have done, because I had an X19 and I drove you around in it. I'm sure shows that you weren't listening. I'll have explained to you that it was a mid-engine.
So this guy's talking away, the salesman, it's got this and it's got that and what. So anyway, my dad and I were like, well, let's have a look, and looked in the boot. Nice big boot, opened the bonnet.
Where's the engine?
And I'm like, yeah. And we're looking down, and I know what's going through my head, and I'm reading that it's exactly the same thought process as my dad, because we both turned around at the same point and we said, where's the engine? And he cracked up laughing. So I can help you with the marketing, can't help you with the car stuff, but you've got that covered anyway. But listen, you can chat for ages. We've only scraped the top in terms of your achievements and your path. I think for anybody that knows you, and for anybody that's obviously listening to this, they will have gained an insight into just the achievements. And I'm not expecting you to say yes about patting yourself on the back, because I know you don't do that. But when I think back to the Nir of that 14, 15, 16-year-old, and now everything that you've accomplished and achieved and contributed, I think you've done amazing stuff. But we're going to end on one final question. I love the saying, failure is a bruise, not a tattoo. Share with us one point in your career, like we're talking professionally, one point in your professional career where you failed, but you used that and turned it into a positive and came out a better worker, manager, or whatever it might be.
I mean, there are plenty. There are lots and lots. I can give you two examples. One from a long time ago and one from really quite recently. The one from a long time ago is going even right back to Coventry. I failed the first year. I'm not ashamed to say that now. I failed the first year. That whole speech of I can teach a monkey to draw. We reached the end of the first year, and I think they decided
you were that monkey.
The monkey still can't draw. So I failed one module, which was basically the module which was about drawing cars. The engineering stuff and the packaging, all this kind of stuff I'd gone through, but I failed the main, most important module, which was, can you draw a bloody car? And I failed that, went and took a year off. Again, don't forget, this is having not taken a year off before Coventry. I was then basically forced to take a year off a year into Coventry, when all my friends had just come back from Europe.
Yeah.
Spent that year working on my drawing ability, doing an art class at the local college, and basically working as a waiter to keep myself going. But I didn't give up. I kept going and managed to get back on. That sunk cost element was there absolutely. I've already given up what I want to give up. I'm not going to give up. I've already given things up in order to get onto Coventry. Yeah. I wasn't just going to quit just because they failed me at the end of the first year. I've made the effort to go back. A much more recent example is something which I'm doing right now. I'm doing a nice little project at the moment with a UK partner for a very light urban vehicle. And the whole idea behind it is that it fits into, again, not to go into all the technicalities, but it fits into the vehicle category that normally is exempt from crash tests. Kind of Renault Twizy type vehicles, cars, that are exempt from crash tests. And we're showing that with our technology, we can do one of those vehicles at half a ton that can pass crash tests and can be safe. The other element of that we want to show is that, just because something's a little lightweight urban electric vehicle doesn't mean it needs to be a little tall toaster, which is what most of these kind of vehicles in that category are. They're generally unappealing vehicles. And so we kind of put ourselves on the line and said, we're going to design a safe one, and we're going to make it cool. We're going to make it dynamic and look good, and something that young people would want to drive. You talk about getting a sports car when you're 22. Nobody can do that now, because first of all, there's very few sports cars left on the market, and even the second-hand ones are way too expensive to insure. So I also mentioned before about doing drawings late at night and then waiting on them until the next day before showing them to anybody. So I made the mistake earlier this year of doing quick drawings, and there was a tight deadline, and just sending them out. And the next day, looking at them, and this just isn't good enough. Like, genuinely, this is just not good enough. It's a bad drawing. And I can see the picture in my head of what I want this car to look like. That's just a bad drawing, and it was too late, because it was out there. And when I say out there, I mean published in magazines and stuff, and got some pretty vicious feedback, I have to say. I would say justifiably, based on what they'd seen.
Okay.
But yeah, I took that on the chin and learned two things. First of all, don't send anything out you're not pleased with yourself. Sit on it for a day. But again, in the same way, kind of a recurring theme of this conversation, I think, was picking myself up and working on it and working on it and working on it, and getting the design to a place where I'm much, much, much happier with it. Recently released the new set of designs, and all of a sudden it's getting positive feedback in Wallpaper magazine and things like that.
Nir, it has been, as I knew it would be, it's been an absolute pleasure sitting and chatting to you. Usually we don't have the camera recording, but been a pleasure. I think the common theme throughout this is that you are an incredibly talented, motivated, inspiring person in your field, well respected, and even with the bumps along the road, you've come out the other end and you've made a real impact. That's very, very impressive. Lots of people don't follow their dreams, and they just end up doing something for the sake of doing something. You consciously made decisions so that you could follow that dream and passion. I think that's very, very impressive and powerful.
I think it's all about passion more than any of the other nice things that you just said.
It's good speaking to you.
Great, thank you.